Despite the current Democrat-induced shutdown, we will get our service members every last penny. Don't worry.
October 2025, Washington, D.C., the heart of American democracy, was enveloped in an unusual silence. It was the silence of temporary barriers, of closed ticket counters at national parks, of understaffed airport security checkpoints. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of paralysis. The federal government had entered its 6th day of the shutdown. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees were furloughed without pay, public services were chaotic, air travel was strained, national parks partially closed, and administrative processing stalled. The economic cost was swelling, an estimated $15 billion in losses per week. A superpower can be crippled not by an external enemy, but by its own governing mechanism when it is no longer driven by trust, but by haggling. The flashpoint for this crisis was not a border wall or the debt ceiling, but a technical argument over healthcare policy. The two parties clashed over renewing the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, a program that helps 15 million Americans cap their costs at 8.5% of their income. Democrats aimed to sustain the policy to prevent sharp insurance premium hikes. Republicans objected, accusing the bill of reviving benefits for undocumented immigrants. However, independent fact-checkers quickly debunked this. The related emergency Medicaid component was small and unchanged. The headlines were filled with indifferent phrases, expiring provisions, offsetting costs, eligible recipients. But beneath that layer of technocratic language lay the reality. Working families recalculating their budgets, cancer patients postponing follow-up visits, working students worrying about next month's premiums. These people didn't care about provisions, they cared about life itself. Yet, as politics became consumed by the power game, life was held hostage to the clock. A democracy begins to age when technocratic language replaces humanistic language. When a patient becomes an eligible recipient, the political system has lost its heart. Initial polls showed strong public support for maintaining the ACA credits, with blame for the deadlock increasingly focusing on the Republican Party. Yet, in the halls of Congress, the atmosphere remained frigid. Negotiating groups rotated through closed-door meetings, drafts flew back and forth, and news reports changed hourly. Amidst the sounds of keyboards and cameras, citizens only saw the temporarily closed sign. From the outside, the world's greatest democracy looked like a company shut down due to a shareholder dispute. Power doesn't vanish. It is merely imprisoned in procedure. And when the procedure lasts long enough, citizens forget that power originally belonged to them. The shutdown was not just a budget crisis, it was a test of faith. Did the system still possess the capacity to resolve disagreements without halting the entire machinery? The checks and balances mechanism, designed to prevent abuse of power, became a burden when trust collapsed. A country cannot take a break just because two parties cannot agree on how to keep its people healthy. When paralysis becomes the new normal, democracy enters a post-emotional era where power exists, but civic passion is dead. Television was no longer reporting on border walls or strategy, but on unpaid prescriptions, postponed appointments, and rising insurance costs. Airlines were short-staffed, tourists were turned away at national park entrances, and federal workers weighed rent against food. These seemingly small details reflected the greatest truth of the era. People were living in the consequences of politics they couldn't control. The irony of power was striking. In order to negotiate ways to keep healthcare costs reasonable, the state instead increased costs for the entire economy. $15 billion was lost each week over a few lines of text. That was the price of obstinance, far more expensive than the price of a solution. As the political storm swept Washington, few expected that at the center of the story would be a woman who once mixed cocktails in a Bronx bar. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, often derided by conservative media as a teenage revolutionary, has become the perfect antithesis to the frozen power on Capitol Hill and, more importantly, to the Trump administration's political cliff-edge strategy. The entire government shutdown was fueled by the Trump administration and congressional Republicans' refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act credit, a move Democrats saw as a direct attack on the healthcare system for working families. While the president's allies have publicly threatened to use the shutdown as an unprecedented opportunity to permanently cut federal programs and even fire federal workers, AOC has countered their scare tactics with a counter-narrative of fearless access. While President Trump projects an image of absolute control, dismissing public opposition and demanding that Democrats blink first, AOC immediately takes aim at his perception of power. "Donald Trump is much weaker than he looks," she declared publicly, urging her Democratic colleagues to stand firm. What they rely on is an impression of power, a sense of inevitability, that we have to give up first. She didn't come to negotiate with the president's representatives in secret rooms. She came to remind everyone that the Capitol doesn't belong to politicians, it belongs to the people. While the administration has sought to weaponize government shutdowns to punish Democratic-leaning states and agencies, AOC has weaponized simplicity. While other members of Congress hid in secret chambers, she walked into the deserted hall, broadcasting live on her old phone. The image spread faster on social media than any formal speech. A young delegate led people through closed doors, explaining how the legislature worked The contrast is stark. One, represented by the president, wields the vast, disruptive power of the state to enforce his will. The other, represented by a young congresswoman, quietly wields the soft power of authenticity to redefine political service. The Republican charge that the shutdown was caused by Senate Democratic leaders, panic-stricken by a primary challenge led by AOC, only magnifies her influence and legitimizes her role as the true voice of the indomitable opposition. She didn't speak to the television cameras. She spoke directly to those present. I'm not a superhero. I'm just the person with the keys. That simple statement was a direct and devastating contrast to a presidency that thrived on pomp and authoritarianism. At the time, America was living in a paradox. On television, the president talked about the power of strong government and threatened mass layoffs. In reality, people saw a young congresswoman walking alone through the cold halls of Congress, winning the battle for public attention simply by opening doors that the old order had slammed shut. People began calling her trips the People's Tour. What started as a small group of college students visiting a nation on lockdown became a symbol of resistance to silence. In front of the cameras, AOC gave a lecture, smiling. There were no professional guides, no studio lights, just a clear voice echoing through the empty space. This is where we make the rules. And this is where we have to ask ourselves, who gets to make the rules when the government is shut down? When the video went viral, the political world was divided. One side mocked her, calling it a political stunt and a PR stunt. The other saw it differently. The simplicity of her actions was something Washington had forgotten. In a city where everything is measured by power, money, and influence, AOC chose the most mundane of jobs, opening doors. And it was that ordinariness that attracted attention. She didn't address the television cameras. She addressed the audience directly. I'm not a superhero. I'm just a key holder. The simple statement touched a long repressed emotional chord, the belief that politics need not be an elitist affair. Thousands of comments poured in from New York. She's doing what everyone should be doing. One wrote, "She's reminding us that government is for the people, not the budget." Another replied, "In those days, America experienced a paradox. On television, the president spoke of the power of a strong government. In reality, a young congresswoman was seen walking alone through the cold halls of Congress. That image encapsulated the whole story of power, one side trying to show it was in control, while the other quietly acted and won with authenticity. The big message. Many commentators have called this a 21st century paradox. When the vast apparatus of government collapses, a small individual keeps the public spirit alive. AOC didn't change the law. She simply did what anyone could do, but no one dared. In politics, sometimes a simple act is the most powerful blow to the system. When she opened the Capitol, it wasn't just to let students in, but to instill a new idea. Democracy doesn't need permission to exist. That act, without a budget or a bill, had a more powerful impact than hundreds of Senate meetings. After the tour, she told an interviewer, "I just thought, if people can't come into this place, how can they believe that their voice matters?" The question stunned Washington, because behind the formality, perhaps the authorities themselves had forgotten the answer. Media scholars later wrote that the People's Tour was one of the first examples of symbolic politics in the network age. But what made this act different was not technique, but emotion. It stemmed from the belief that democracy cannot wait. As her followers grew, it became clear that AOC was more than just a media phenomenon. She was a natural reaction of a society fed up with the language of power. When the government shut down, she reminded everyone that politics never stops. In a later interview, she recalled, "I used to serve the people who made the laws, now I make the laws. But that doesn't make me different. I still believe it's my job to serve." There was no arrogance in her voice, just the certainty of someone who knows the line between office and responsibility. Washington began to talk about the AOC effect, not because she wielded immense power, but because she reminded people that power could be redefined. In tense press conferences, senior members of Congress were asked, "Why can she do simple things that you can't?" They dodged the question, but the question hung in the Capitol dome like a small crack in the marble of the old order. American politics was moving in two opposing directions. One, the conservative establishment shrinking to defend itself. The other, the younger generation seeking to open up new spaces. And the image of AOC standing in the middle of the empty hall, pointing at the Lincoln statue, became a symbol of that collision. Amid the silence, she said, "This is not just history. This is a reminder that democracy must be defended every day. It is said that America has forgotten how to speak in symbols." But perhaps she made them remember. No lengthy speech was needed, just a single, well-timed gesture. Politics, at its deepest, is always a matter of timing. The legacy of Crack the Capitol has finally reopened. Official tours have resumed, but visitors say they still remember AOC's tour. One student wrote online, "I walked where power ceases, and I saw democracy still breathing. The event is over, but its echoes linger." It leaves a question America must still answer: who maintains democracy when those entrusted to protect it are gone? Economists have calculated the damage to be more than $11 billion, but the biggest damage is not recorded in the books. The the sense that the state, an entity supposedly immutable, can stop breathing like an exhausted body. People saw a harsh truth. If they didn't keep democracy alive, no one else would. The world looked at America differently. Capitals in Europe, Asia, and Africa, places that had once been models of American democracy, began to wonder what happens when the nation that symbolized stability becomes evidence of paralysis. America's soft power, faith in its processes, laws, and ability to self-correct was suddenly shaken. Scholars have written that power does not die because it is defeated, it dies when people no longer believe in it. And 2019 was the year that faith was tested. No coup, no military uprising, just a long silence, a silence long enough to hear the foundations cracking. AOC became a symptom of an era in which faith in old institutions has waned, and a younger generation has stepped into the void in a different way, not with power, but with action. This has given rise to the concept of citizen soft power, based not on armies or budgets, but on the ability to keep values running when the system grinds to a halt. But the larger question looms: can a nation survive indefinitely on such individual actions alone? As old institutions grow bloated and citizen faith wanes, can democracy save itself with small fires, or does it need a true rebirth? The most profound lesson from Washington is not just for America. It is a reminder for all struggling democracies: never take performance for granted, because even a small crack in trust can bring the whole machine to a halt. The paradox of our times is that when trust is rekindled, other forces learn to exploit the paradox of power. They understand that if people feel abandoned, they will flock to anyone who promises to open the door, even if that door leads to populism. AOC's lesson, "Open the door to democracy," can be twisted into the slogan, "Open the door to disrupt order." When the doors of the Capitol closed after AOC's last impromptu tour, Washington changed. Not through a revolution, but through a quiet crack. That crack was not in the stone wall, but in the mindset of power. The system may be huge, but trust is fragile. And when trust is broken, any institution can collapse with the simple click of a lock. B. If you believe that politics is service, not a performance, and we must expose these powerful paradoxes, then like this video to affirm your support for transparency and action. Share widely to spread the message that power belongs to the served, not the ruler. Comment below, what simple civic action do you think has the greatest potential to change the political landscape? And most importantly, hit subscribe and ring the bell to join us as we continue to analyze the macro shifts and discover who is really shaping the world order. Join the debate, because in an age of fractured trust, understanding is our most powerful weapon. It is a reminder to all struggling democracies: never take activism for granted. Because it only takes a small crack in trust for the whole machine to stop working. The paradox of our times is that when trust is restored, other forces have learned to exploit the paradox of power. They understand that if people feel abandoned, they will flock to anyone who promises to open the door, even if that door leads to populism. The lesson of AOC, "Open the door to democracy," can be twisted into the slogan, "Open the door to disrupt order." When the doors of the Capitol closed after AOC's last impromptu tour, Washington changed. Not through a revolution, but through a quiet crack. That crack was not in the stone wall, but in the mindset of power. The system may be massive, but trust is fragile. And when trust is broken, any institution can collapse with the click of a lock. A U.S. shutdown hits sixth day in healthcare funding standoff. BHTTPS://www.facebook.com/share/r/1FYA5UDUSM/